Hi guys, it's Siobhan with ToKittyandBeyond. Welcome back to my channel. Today I wanted to talk about something that I've been meaning to talk about and make a video about for a long time, and that's timeline shifting. Now, it can also be called timeline jumping, and it's any time that we are shifting from one timeline to another. And I recently had a client where we were seeing into what she was doing at soul level. Basically, what I was shown was that she was essentially cycling through layers and layers and layers in the space-time continuum and going through all of these different aspects of time. And the reason she was doing this was because there was multiple different layers of time that were all connected through space. And she was one of those individuals who was and is part of the crystal grid reorientation here on Earth. I was also shown in the session that the past grid network, which was from thousands and thousands of years ago, was being dismantled up until recently, and the new one was being installed. Now, the new one hadn't been fully turned online yet. It had gone through sort of bits and pieces where the grid was being active in certain areas, and then it was being adjusted. I was shown in this session that the grid is fully online now for the first time ever in the history of humanity in this way, this particular grid being brand new, not the old one. So this is something that was really interesting, and what the session, what I was being shown in the session was that she was going to these particular grid points, either consciously, unconsciously, or physically, and going into these areas for the specific purpose of breaking down and clearing the cache in terms of timeline probabilities and also past timelines. So she was doing healing work on the collective's behalf, and she was also doing healing work on her own behalf. I was also shown in this session that I was doing the same thing, but slightly differently. I'm not doing it at the grid level, I'm doing it at the Akashic level. So she was kind of doing it at that as below level, and I was doing it at that as above level, which was really cool. I also had a session with a different client couple of weeks ago, and what I was shown there was that he was from a particular race, the Syrian elder race, which I talk about in the different Syrian races video. I will put that here. Yeah, anyway. And what I was shown was that that particular race was one that was born sort of closer to the epicenter of time and space. As time and space is constructed, there's this expansion process that happens. And so as you're closer to the epicenter, the middle starting point of that, time is more of a concept than it is an experience. The further you get away from the center, the more experience you will have subjectively of the passage of time. So the closer to the center, the less passage of time. The further away from the center, the greater the passage of time, or the awareness of that. So I was shown in that session that he was having the experience where he was shifting through time pretty rapidly as well. And so the epicenter where he was from, where time pretty much stood still, so to speak, so he could live in a body for millennia without it decaying or deteriorating because time really wasn't moving and affecting the physical body in that way, versus going to the outer layers where time is more subjective and experiential and relative, especially as that relates to matter, was a whole different story. And so he was traveling through the universe in different areas where time was much more linear or much more experienced, and going to those areas for the particular purpose of understanding how that continuum of time and space functioned. There were some other things in that session which I won't talk about because they were more personal to him, his experience and his galactic history, but I thought that was really interesting. So what I've noticed recently is that we're going through a big shift collectively, and the last 2 weeks to about a month have been particularly challenging. So if you guys have been having a really hard time, you've been going through a lot of sort of dark nights of the souls, maybe for your first time, maybe for your second, third, fourth, fifth, seventh time, who knows? But it's intense, and it feels like we're kind of hitting a wall here. It almost feels like there's this hopelessness coming up. There's this agitation, frustration, unhappiness. And the reason being is because, first of all, we're getting blasted with this really high frequency energy that's coming from the sun, which is driving the Schumann resonance through the roof, but it's also connected to the grid that I was talking about earlier. So that grid pattern is now online. And for the first time in human history, this particular grid pattern is charged up and fully functional. So we, as light workers who are sensitive to this grid pattern, which I'm assuming you're a light worker if you're watching this video, you're more sensitive to it. You feel it more intensely than, say, somebody who's unaware of these types of energies and concepts. So we're going through this process of clearing the cache for the timelines, for the Earth grid, and for the collective of humanity. That's why it's so intense right now. It feels very difficult, challenging. There's all sorts of stuff coming up. There's also a lot of timelines that are converging and or collapsing. So when we timeline shift, we're experiencing these things like deja vu. I made a previous video on that, which I will link here as well so you can access it. I've made a couple of other videos on timeline shifting and timeline jumping, but the most important thing to note is where and how this is happening for you. So for example, if you're experiencing deja vu more recently, especially if you're noticing those number sequences really kicking up, like angel numbers repeating, patterns repeating, synchronicities really flying off, usually those are indications of timeline shifts happening as well. Now, what I'm wanting to talk about here is timeline jumping, which is essentially timeline shifting. I think those two terms can be interchangeable. From my level of understanding, when we have a timeline potential that we're not necessarily on, but that may align better with us, if we align our frequency to match that timeline, what we will immediately do is just jump over there. And it's an instantaneous thing. It doesn't take any time to do, and it happens without our conscious awareness most of the time. That's where we can start to look for the symptoms of a timeline shift happening for us personally or for the collective. At a collective level, it's seen through the Mandela effect. Personally, it can show up as just major changes happening in your life. All of a sudden, based on a decision or an action that you implemented that was different than something that you would have done before. So any major choice, decision, or new action, even a new level of consciousness, can shift you onto a different timeline. And we're doing this all the time. So it's not just happening when we're making big decisions. It happens all the time when we're making small shifts or changes, either to our frequency, our thought patterns, or our actions. It's nothing to be afraid of, and you can always jump between timelines back and forth. You can be on different timelines than the person next to you. So everyone's kind of unique in this sense. We do have more collective and global timelines, but I won't go into that in this video. Okay, that's too much. So the timeline shifting can happen when you yourself are shifting and or the energies around you are shifting. And I think those two are interrelated and we can't really separate them because it's a dual process. Now, timeline convergence is something that I talk about in the deja vu video, and that's kind of the same thing, but it's a little bit different. Timeline convergence is when you're kind of merging different timelines together. So maybe you've learned something and you're applying that in a much more evolved way. What can happen is that those timelines will converge and they'll sort of form into one. So the old timeline and the new timeline, instead of you jumping from one to the other, they can kind of become one and allow you to move more seamlessly with less disruption. Because if you're jumping across in a major way, it can be a little bit disruptive. You know, things can change really rapidly. You might feel uncomfortable with those changes. Things might get ripped away all of a sudden, or you might get dropped something in your lap that's unexpected. So that's where timeline convergences can be a little bit more of a buffer in terms of how we actually feel and are able to move through that next timeline or that timeline shift that's happened. Timeline splits are something different too, where we are diverging from a particular timeline that doesn't align with us anymore. So that would be when we're shifting to the next one or converging into a new one that's entirely different from the old one. We could also be going off from somebody else's timeline that we were connected to. So the timelines could split in us making this particular choice and another person making a different one. Maybe we were together at one point and then splitting. So those timelines can split like that as well. This is just from my level of awareness right now, and that can change. But I'm really interested in how these timelines are shifting, what you guys are feeling, because I know that we're going through a lot of personal Lightworker shifts right now, and that's also being reflected in the collective. The collective is doing some massive shifting, and it has done for the last 2 years. So there's a lot more coming into 2023 and 2024. Massive timeline shifting, convergences, splits, all that stuff happening. So let me know your questions in the comment section below, because I definitely didn't cover every aspect of this, but I just wanted to make sort of like a quick video. So let me know what you guys think. Let me know what your experiences are and or your questions, and I'd love to have a conversation about that. So thank you so much for watching, guys. If you'd like to book a session with me, I do Akashic readings, Reiki, tarot, and spiritual counseling, and all of the information can be found in the description box below, and or you can go to my website, ToKittyandBeyond.com. Thanks so much again for watching. I love you guys, and we'll see you next time. Bye.